Bubesi mphathi yomhlaba. Bubesi mphathi yomhlaba. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Football is a Religion, right? So yeah, here we are. We are going to be discussing the Italian Serie A, right? So there are a lot of games that have already taken place over the weekend, right? And I'll actually start with the first game of Matchday 26, right? Between high-flying Bologna as well as strugglers Hellas Verona. So the score resulted in a 2-0 win for the home side, Bologna, right? And which means that Bologna, they now move up to 4th place in the Serie A standings after beating struggling Hellas Verona by 2-0 at home on Friday evening, right? So that perhaps means that Bologna now are on 48 points from 26 games. Basically, they are now 3 points ahead of 5th place Atalanta, who have got 2 games in hand, and they are basically now 4 points adrift of AC Milan in 3rd. So remember, AC Milan host Atlanta on Sunday, right? So the goal came from Giovanni Fabbian, who netted from point blank range, you understand, to give Bologna the lead in the 27th minute of the game, following a corner, and the goal stood, after, a video assistant referee review, right? And then midfielder Remo Freuler, doubled their advantage with the first touch after the hour mark, and he scored his first goal for Bologna since joining, the team in September on loan from Premier League side Nottingham Forest, right? So basically, Bologna now extend their winning streak to 5 games, right? They've now extended their winning streak in Serie A to 5 games. Basically, that's their longest and their best, their best ever run, since 1967 when they won 6 games in a row. You understand? So now their next game is that they're going to visit, Atalanta on the 3rd of March. So that's going to be a battle for 4th place, I guess, battle for which team will actually, finish, in the final spot for the UEFA Champions League next season. And it's going to actually be an incredible game of football to watch. Okay, so yeah, man, we're still gonna continue with Serie A, right? So in Serie A action, there was like 2 late victories in the Serie A, games on Saturday, right? So first up was an injury time win for Empoli at Sassuolo, with Simeone Bastoni, scoring in the 94th minute to actually wrap up all 3 points. A little later in the day, we saw Monza visit bottom placed Salernitana. And with the game seemingly heading for a draw, 2 goals were enough to secure a victory for AC Monza. Remember, AC Monza are, booming with confidence after that, famous 4-2 victory at home over, title challengers AC Milan, right? So Monza, remember, they left it late, as they earned, a 2-0 victory at Salernitana, right, in the Serie A on Saturday, while Empoli won by 3-2 at Sassuolo and Genoa beat Udinese. So Salernitana, started the day at the bottom of the table with just like 13 points after a miserable season so far. But they appeared on course to actually move it, into 14th, with the score goalless with the quarter of an hour remaining, right? So, however, Paulo Daniel Maldini, the son of Paulo Maldini, the great AC Milan, defender Paulo Maldini's son, Daniel Maldini, scored after 78 minutes for the visitors. And then 5 minutes later, we saw Matteo Passina, popped up to make the 3 points certain, right? So as for that result now means that Salernitana, remain rooted to the bottom of the table, while Monza are now in 11th position on the table. And earlier in the day, we saw Empoli, grab a dramatic injury time victory over Sassuolo, and the hosts equalized twice in the match, but never led before they, lost in the 94th minute of the game. So that was basically an emphatic, victory. It was actually a great game of football to actually watch that one. We even saw Sebastiano Luperto, scored after 11 minutes to give the away side the lead. Before Andrea Pinamonti, scored from the spot 9 minutes later in the second half to actually make it 1-1. And, to say the least, it was a matter of, you could tell that game was pretty much balanced. There was so much balance between that game. It was basically end-to-end stuff where both teams created so many chances, right? They were just not clinical enough. Yes, we saw a lot of goals, but both teams could have been more clinical in terms of finding the back of the net. We could have seen more goals in that particular encounter. Luckily, we saw Mbaye Niang's, penalty then also put the visitors back in front, but we saw an equalizer from the home side, through Gianmarco Ferrari, who looked to have secured a point for Sassuolo as he grabbed the team's second, 13 minutes from the end of normal time. But however, we saw Simon Bastoni, popped up in deep injury with the glancing header, at the near post to wrestle back the lead. And, which means that now the result actually now implies that Sassuolo are just one spot above the relegation zone, and with the same 20 points as 18th place Verona, and Empoli now move 5 points clear of the bottom three in 13th, right? So Genoa's 2-0 victory over Udinese with goals by Matteo Retegui as well as Mattia Bani, in the first half kept them in 12th position, with Udinese still remaining on 16th position on 23 points. And with the visitors seeing Thomas Thiessen Christensen sent off early in the second half, it was actually a mountain to climb for them, in that particular encounter. It was a huge mountain for them to climb, and it was very difficult for them to actually get a decent result from that match. But at least, them holding on to a draw was just as good enough as they could do. So yeah, man, I can say that the Serie A table is really getting heated. We're starting to see a lot happening at the bottom half of the table. The scramble, to actually survive, the scramble for relegation, the scramble to actually survive in Italy's, top flight is actually getting heated up. We see a lot of teams there at the bottom, and even those teams who are in basically comfortable positions, they're not comfortable because, like I said, you heard Genoa are only just a few points ahead of the bottom three, just like even Empoli in 13th position, right? They're only just 3 points off the drop. So nobody's safe yet. But it's still going to get hectic, and it's very exciting, because currently Inter Milan are the runaway leaders. I can't say much for the top of the table, but the battle for those Champions League spots are actually getting heated up. We see Juventus dropping points once again, AC Milan taking on Atalanta. We see even Bologna now are getting closer and closer and closer, with Atalanta, lurking behind them. So it's actually going to be very hectic. It's going to be very interesting to see, which teams actually finish in those European spots for Champions League football next season, and which teams are going to, be able to avoid the drop, or which teams are going to go down, to Serie B, right? Yeah. What on earth just happened? What on earth just happened? Just when you thought that Juventus were going to drop points again, what on earth just happened? That's the question I have. Listen, Weston McKennie just dropped another creative masterclass. As Juventus, had to snatch a late win over Frosinone, but think about it. The star was even substituted with an injury before the dramatic winner, right? Because Weston McKennie literally delivered 2 sharp first half assists, right? Although you look at Juventus, they were made to actually work desperately hard for a crucial 3 points against Frosinone, right? So it was you looked at this particular encounter, you thought that Juventus were about to drop points once again. But hey guys, football is a religion. Football is a religion. Football is unpredictable. That's why it's called the beautiful game. Because look, Juventus, they started fast with McKennie's midfield bursts. The defensive failings also saw the Bianconeri, pegged back. The last-gasp winner, keeps their title hopes alive. Only alive. It's like slim title hopes because Inter is running away with it. But look, let me give you a brief on what happened in this encounter between Juventus as well as Frosinone at the Allianz Stadium in Turin. So, what actually happened, guys? What took place? Let's get to the juice. Let's cut the juice, right? Let's squeeze the fruit. Let's squeeze it and create the juice. So the Bianconeri, made a false start when McKennie's knee touch, the cross, he teed up, the Serbian striker Dusan Vlahovic, to actually open the scoring just after, 3 minutes. But Frosinone hit back, surprisingly. The wayside hit back immediately with a thumping header from, Walid Chidera and a fine finish from Marco Bresciani, to actually expose Juventus' fragile confidence. Because currently, Juventus, man, their confidence is very fragile. They're just not at their best. They haven't had a good season. Remember, they've been dropping points left, right, center. On top of the fact, to even make matters worse, it seems like the title is slowly but surely slipping away from them because Inter Milan seem to be running away with the title as they just keep on adding the numbers. They just keep adding the points. Lautaro Martinez is on fire. That combination between himself and Marcus Thuram is just solid, it's fluid, you understand, and it's effective and lethal for Inter Milan. But yeah, back to the game at the Allianz Stadium, right? So McKennie and Vlahovic combined again to actually equalize on 32 minutes. But a scrappy second period, so the home side, they were so frustrated, until the final minute of injury time when centre-back, Daniel Rugani forced the ball home to break Frosinone's, game resistance to actually give Juve, a win that actually keeps their faint title hopes alive, right? It's very slim. I don't see Inter Milan, like I say, I'll repeat, I don't see Inter Milan actually falling off. I don't see Inter Milan actually slipping, actually letting the title slip through through their fingertips. I don't see that happening. But Juventus were actually staring down the barrel of a fifth game without a win, right? But Rugani's late intervention, keeps their slim title hopes alive, right? Although they will need leaders Inter Milan to start dropping points sooner rather than later, because a prospect that basically is a prospect that looks very unlikely, right? Because there were nerves, frustrations. It was very evident throughout the second period where Frosinone even threatened to take all 3 points home on a couple of occasions. But Juventus, kept on pushing, forcing home a winner in the game's dying moments of the game, right? And from that particular moment in time, we saw the impact of Weston McKennie. So Weston McKennie, he underlined his fine season by laying on 2 goals, to actually make him Juventus' leading assist provider this season. A smart control, a delivery, you saw Vlahovic open the scoring, and the pair linked up again when a neat pass from the United States, national team star created an equalizer. And then we saw Timothy Weah was called from the bench just after the hour mark to provide, width. As you saw the home side were, they were beginning to run out of ideas. There was no ideas. Nothing was going according to plan for Maximiliano Allegri's side, right? So they had to just go for broke and actually bring on Timothy Weah. Although he was actually unable to make a telling contribution, Timothy Weah, and give credit to Frosinone's defensive resilience once again, right? It was indeed broken, but give credit to the home side for actually, giving it their all, right? Because you could see nothing was just going according to plan for the old lady, and we saw Weston McKennie, he was outstanding in the first half, where it was actually clear that, his runs, from the midfield were just beyond the Frosinone backline, and it was actually the key component in Juventus' attacking plans, because you actually looked at the first goal. The first goal actually, typified the fact that, he's broke free. And he smartly found Vlahovic, right? Because it was actually neat footwork in a tight space. That's the ability that this, brilliant player has got, right? Remember he was on loan at Leeds United at some point in time in his career. So, his neat footwork in the tight spaces, guys. He's just so able, he's lethal in tight spaces. That's what actually makes him have this incredible ability to become a game changer. It saw him actually find the big Serbian international once again. And one slight concern for, the fans of the United States is that, he suffered a late shoulder injury that actually saw him being replaced. But, it seemed to be just a knock. So I don't even see it as anything serious, and he will be back in action pretty soon, I can tell you. And when you look at his compatriot, Timothy Weah, he unfortunately could not make much of an impact, right? Because he was brought on in the second half as the Juventus attack, ground, it came to a halt, right? And he was actually asked to provide some width on the right-hand side. But, he had little chance to actually make impact in the game. As the game became very scrappy, it became punctuated by stoppages. A lot of things was happening. So, unfortunately, he could just not make impact. But it was a much-needed 3 points for Juventus because now they travel to reigning champions Napoli next Sunday, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a very easy game for them because right now we know Napoli versus Juventus at the Diego Armando Maradona Stadium is always a fiercely contested encounter. So it's not going to be an easy one for Juventus. It's still going to be tough for them, right? They really need to put in the effort. They really need to understand the fact that they have to play for broke. They have to be more consistent if they are to challenge Inter Milan for the league, because basically it's a matter of winning all your games, which perhaps is too much of an ask. It's too much of an ask, but maybe this victory will give them much more confidence going forward, to say the least. So, what's actually next in the Serie A, right? Next in the Serie A, we see there will be a clash between Lecce taking on runaway leaders Inter Milan, right? So what that means is that Inter Milan will actually aim to actually extend their lead, at the top of the standings as they travel to mid-table survivors Lecce, on Sunday, right? And Roberto, da Versa's, will actually want, a good game at home for Lecce against runaway leaders Inter Milan. And although you have to look at the fact that, their record against Simone Inzaghi's side has really been dismal, to say the least. It has been dismal in the last, couple of years, because Lecce are keeping hold of their mid-table status, despite a terrible run of results, of late. And one thing that you must actually consider is the fact that, yes, they might have 24 points on the board, but the Versa side, may appear safe for now, right? Like I said earlier on, but they could actually, get dragged near the bottom three with a string of disappointing results, while they are far from being favorites to even take even a point against Inter Milan, but Lecce will actually have their eyes on, a trio of games against fellow strugglers Frosinone, Hellas Verona, as well as Salernitana, right? But, for the fact that Lecce, have lost 5 of their last 6 Serie A games, with the solitary victory coming on home soil against Fiorentina. The previous weekend, they succumbed to a 2-0 loss to Torino as Darversas, saw, Marin Pongracic, get sent off with a red card sandwich between goals from Raul Balanova as well as Duvan Zapata to actually seal the win for the Turin side. And we saw, meanwhile, Inter Milan, is in flying form, ahead of a pivotal few weeks as Inzaghi, wants his side to maintain momentum and take the next significant steps in their season. Because remember, in midweek, we saw Inter Milan, they had, to wait up until late on in the game through Marco Arnautovic to actually strike, to seal, a first, Champions League round of 16 victory over Atletico Madrid. However, what you could actually tell is that the manager would obviously want to keep these players, at their feet, and actually keep them on the ground, and focused ahead of the reverse fixture in Madrid, at the Wanda Metropolitano, which is not an easy hunting ground for many teams. But domestically, Inter Milan nearly has, they have got the upper hand on the Serie A title, as they are currently 9 points ahead and have a game in hand over their nearest rival Juventus. Massimiliano Allegri's men have suffered off late in the title race and failed to win any of their last 4 clashes before actually securing victory against Frosinone at home. Inter Milan actually took their chances and secured 3 points in all games during that period, including a narrow victory over Juventus. For now, any team, be it in the Serie A or Europe, must actually be afraid of facing Inter Milan. And what's even surprising and what is even ironic is that not many people are even fancying Inter Milan to win the Champions League, like I am. the teams that I fancy winning the UEFA Champions League this season is obviously defending champions Manchester City, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, as well as Inter Milan. Those are the 4 teams that I fancy, but it's funny that most people don't even fancy Inter Milan. Considering the fact that, they are in sublime form, of their life, and they're actually vying for top honors by the end of the current season, right? So you can never, write off Inter Milan in terms of winning the Champions League, because even Real Madrid, Man City, and even Man City had a tough time against Inter Milan in the final last season. So you understand, you just cannot take your eyes off this Inter side with this, Lautaro Martinez being in sublime form, just breaking records left, right, center. You have Marcus Thuram, who has been a phenomenal signing for them this season. So, hey, this is the team to watch. Because you look at today's team, you look at what's going to happen. Perhaps what I'm predicting might happen in today's clash between Lecce and Inter Milan is that, Lecce will miss 2 critical stars for the match against Inter Milan, with Patrick Dorgu as well as Marin Pongracic, both having to serve suspensions. The latter received the red card in the previous game against Torino and will miss this big game over the weekend, right, against Inter Milan. Beyond that, we saw Roberto D'Avresa's he does not have any injured related, absentees, as he will have the benefit of being chosen from a near full squad. He might ponder another change in his team, which might be, choosing between Roberto Piccoli as well as Nikola Kristovic. And the former, has got 4 Serie A goals this season, with 3 of them coming on home soil, which could actually give the home side an upper hand, right? However, D'Arversa, might go along with Kristovic as his preferred number 9, flanked by, Pontus Aklumovist as well as Nicola Sansone, right? So that's basically, the predicted, team setup, the team lineup, because obviously we know Falcone will start in goal. We see Gendry also will start. Perhaps even Tuba as well as Barchiroto will actually be the 2 centre-back pairing. We'll also see Gallo on the left-hand side, perhaps Kaba in the midfield with Ramadani, Odin, and then in attack, obviously we're going to see Sansone as the number 9 and Kristovi, right? Supporting him is Kristovi as well as Amklovist. So yeah, that's basically my predicted starting 11 for the home side in this must-win clash against Inter Milan, even though it's going to be a very tough ask for them to actually win this game. Because look, Simone Inzaghi, right, he has no reason to actually doubt his current selection choices, although they are some injury related absentees over which he has no power of, right? For instance, his key striker, Marcus Thuram, limped off against Atletico Madrid in midweek, and he will need attention, to nurse his injury. And the Frenchman, might miss out altogether from the Lecce clash, and he had, if he is to return fit after the midweek problem, Inzaghi might not have, started with him anyway, because it's very precautionary, to actually keep some of your best players fit, for those important crucial games in the Champions League, right? Now that they have to return to the Wanda Metropolitano against Atletico Madrid. It's not all one. Yes, they go in with an advantage, but it's not all one. And with Arnautovic getting the decisive goal against Atletico, the Austrian has given himself a chance to actually start in the place of Thuram. Inzaghi would actually like to also bring in some balance and give his French players a run out against Lecce. With that, he might bring in Christian Asalani, in place of Hakan Çalhanoğlu at the base of Inter's midfield. He might also bring on, David Fratesi, also penciled in to start. Henrik Mkhitaryan will also keep his place in the lineup. Perhaps on the wide areas, we'll see Federico Del Marco, who's also likely to keep his place. Maybe Denzel Dumfries could also replace Darmian on the right flank. At the back, we might see Stefan De Vrij, Carlos Augusto, might also get the nod. That's also allowing, it might also allow, players like Inzaghi to actually rest the likes of Acerbi as well as Alessandro Bastoni. We might also see Alexis Sanchez also get a start, get a run out against Lecce. So, yeah, it's pretty much interesting to see what the manager will do, right? And it's very important for you guys to actually notice that, Lecce are actually 4 points above the relegation, following their 2-0 defeat against Torino last Friday. And Lecce, right, have lost 7 of their last 9 Serie A games, and Lecce have a single victory over Inter Milan in their last 15 league encounters. So Inter Milan, on the other hand, have scored in 19 consecutive Serie A away matches, right? What an incredible record that is. And Inter Milan have won 9 consecutive games across all competitions. So it's more likely they'll make it 10, because I see them winning this game emphatically, away from home. And yes, we might also look at the fact that, look, Arnautovic, Inter Milan were able to find a replacement for Romelu Lukaku, Edin Dzeko, with the Austrian striker Marko Arnautovic, and he has had a decent time until the midweek clash, right? And Arnautovic, produced a game-changing moment against Atletico, to actually take home the, match winner title. And now with the fact that Marcus Thuram is actually injured, he has the chance to actually show his manager what he's capable of, and we all know what Marko Arnautovic is capable of doing, right? Simone Inzaghi, also has Alexis Sanchez, who might not have the numbers to show, but certainly puts in a hard shift when called upon. Hence, it is a testing period for Arnautovic to show his caliber, what he's capable of, show his quality, show his ability and actually show, his, professionalism, and actually come to the forefront, with a good performance against Lecce, which also gives the manager a selection headache. And basically, my prediction from this particular encounter is that Inter Milan are going to win this game by 4-0. Simple. 4-0. Simple. That's it. I don't know what your guys' prediction is, but yeah, I see Inter Milan winning this game by 4-0, because look, Inter Milan, they may have won by a solitary goal in midweek, but still, man, the side is capable of creating many opportunities and breaking down defenses, which is where Lecce might suffer, because Simone Inzaghi has a well-drilled side, at his disposal. And on Sunday, tonight, right, the manager, who wants, a commanding performance from his side, will actually see, Inter winning this game in a big way, right? Because remember, Lecce have struggled for relevance and somehow have kept, hold of their place in the mid-table. They may not fancy themselves to take something against, Inter Milan, although their coach, Roberto D'Arversa, he might want to see, a fight in his players, to actually achieve the impossible, right? Even when I say the impossible, I even mean a draw. A draw is even impossible for them. But in any case, Inter Milan are the clear favorites, right? To actually take all 3 points and extend their lead at the top of the standings. That's just my own prediction from this particular encounter. All right. Welcome again to another episode of Football is a Religion. It's your host here, Bubesi Mpati Mhlaba. You understand? Welcome once again to Football is a Religion. First of all, it has been a great weekend, to say the least. It was a wonderful weekend of footballing action, not only locally but across the globe. I certainly did enjoy the football, man, and I hope you did. Despite the fact that we did see some disappointing results here and there, Manchester United losing at home to Fulham, Kaiser Chiefs losing to a minor side in the Nedbank Cup at home as well. But despite that, there was still great action of football, to actually be seen, to actually be witnessed, and we certainly did witness it in the Italian Serie A, because that's where we will begin. Between the game, it was a game between relegation threatened Cagliari taking on defending champions Napoli, right? So it's another matter of fact that Napoli, they do actually suffer. Napoli have actually suffered again, based on the fact that Claudio Ranieri's side, Cagliari, were able to strike again in Zona Sassonari, right? Because you look at the Sardinians, right? They're actually, fighting against relegation, but they're a team that actually often thrives in injury time. They were actually able to frustrate the champions in order for them to claim a point at home, right? So it was basically a decent result for them, but it's a result that does not get them out of the relegation zone. Because, in Italy, what they say is that, the final moments of a football game, right, known as the Zona Cesanari, right? Which is basically a reference to Renato Cesarini, right? Cesarini, the former Juventus midfielder, right? Who basically had cemented a reputation, for late goals. After he scored that 90th minute winner for the Italian national team against Hungary in 1931, right? Yeah, way back. Most of us were not even born at that time. That is basically almost a decade, almost a century ago, right? Because now we're in 2024, so that is basically almost a century ago, right? Just under a century ago. And that term has long since passed into a general use, describing anything from political deals, brokered right before a vote, to homework assignments handed in on a deadline, right? And perhaps it is time for an update, because in Serie A, this season, injury time belongs to Claudio Ranieri's Cagliari. The Sardinians, have enjoyed a difficult season, to actually say the least. Sitting joint, second from bottom on the table. But the outlook, could be a lot worse. Because against Frosinone last October, they did something that no Serie A team had ever done before. Which was basically winning after trailing by 3 goals in the 71st minute. So Cagliari, were still 3-2 down in the 90th minute, but Leonardo Pavoletti, struck twice to actually give them a 4-3 win. 2 months later, they recovered from a losing position again in added time, to actually beat Sassuolo by 2-1. And all of this, is to say that Napoli should have known better. And that's the thing about Napoli. Napoli just haven't been able to replicate the form that they had, which actually led to them being champions of Italy last season, and which actually led to them, reaching the quarterfinals of the UEFA Champions League last season. They have really struggled to replicate that form. And, they should have actually understood that, the job had to be done. They should have gotten an insurance goal, because now they had to finish the match, and Cagliari, ticked past the 95 minutes played, because we saw the Parta no pay, we're actually leading 1-0 from a Victor Osimhen header mid through, the second half. And both Matteo Politano, Giovanni Simeone had missed opportunities to extend their advantage late on. And basically, we all know what happens in football, that if you don't take your chances, if you don't actually wrap up the game, you will be punished. And that's exactly what happened to the defending champions Napoli, because, with seconds remaining, we saw Alberto Docena, lumped, one just hopeful ball, towards the Napoli penalty area, right, from his own half. And then we saw Juan Jesus, misread the flight and allowed Zito Luvumbo, to actually slip behind. And that's how it happened to be, that the Cagliari forward, let the ball bounce, and he controlled it with his chest, swiveled it into the corner, right? And that's basically, another thing to say, you can never just underestimate your opponent, right? Irrespective of the fact that, when you're playing against a team that has got nothing to lose, that is in the relegation battle, and they have home ground advantage on top of that, you need to understand the fact that complacency should never be allowed. Complacency should never be tolerated, even if you are the defending champions, because remember, you're playing against the relegation threatened side and away from home, on top of the fact that they've got a good coach in Claudio Ranieri. So it goes without saying that Napoli, they should have known better. They should have really, tucked those opportunities away, because, the Unipol Doma Stadium erupted as Luvumbo, clutching a hamstring, was smothered by teammates. Every point matters, whether you're fighting relegation. And, Cagliari, have earned, 7 points, in the form of goals in second half injury time, and basically we can call that the Zona Ranieri, because, back in October, the manager did predict the fact that, they will keep themselves in the Serie A the same way they got there, because in the last second of the last game, right? And if that is like Cagliari's narrative, this result, basically does fit equally well with the story of Napoli's catastrophic, campaign. And after winning the Serie A for the first time in 33 years, they followed up with one of their worst title defenses of all time. That is basically Napoli's the best way to sum up Napoli's performance this season is that, yeah, it's one of the worst title defenses of all time, because they're basically ninth in the table, and they trail the log leaders Inter Milan, by 29 points. With how many games to go, because now we are already in the second half of the season, so there's no way that they will defend their title. They are even way off Champions League spots, right? And basically, again with Napoli, they are on their third manager of the season. Francesco Calzona officially took over the reins last week, Monday, though his first training session was another day, later, because less than 36 hours before Napoli hosting Barcelona in the round of 16 of the UEFA Champions League. In the circumstances, their 1-1 draw in that fixture could be framed as a good result, and it was harder, to actually find positions, in the dropped, points against Cagliari, and the problem is basically it's a mental issue for Napoli, because they needed to stay in the game, they needed to move for each other, more often, and they've started to actually look like a team, but it's something that they only are able to do it in phases, right? They're only able to do that in phases, because it's not something that you're seeing it like on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, which can actually enable them to get those much needed results in order for them to actually, get a Champions League spot next season. Because you ask yourself, okay, Napoli, not only did they just win the Serie A last season, but they dominated it completely, finishing 16 points clear in first place, and with more goals scored, fewer goals conceded than anyone else in the division. And to actually top it off is that there were small clues late in the season, and some part of magic was, actually fading. You saw Kivisha, Kvaratskhelia, the eventual winner of Serie A's, most voted player award last season. He did not score from March onwards. Napoli only dropped 7 points from their last 24 league games, but lost or drew half of the remaining 14. And we know for a fact that, the relationship between Napoli's manager and the owner was deteriorating, because Luciano Spalletti, learned via email that, Aurelio De Laurentiis, had chosen to trigger a 1-year extension to his contract. And that was the cause of, basically, according to several reports, that might have been like the cause of the breakdown or a symptom, depending on what you guys as the viewers at home choose to believe, which story you choose to actually fall within, right? And Spalletti, was either insulted or simply looking for an excuse to justify a decision he had already made to leave at the end of the campaign. And De Laurentiis, has since insisted that the triggering the option was a formality, intended as a first step before renegotiating to reward the manager with better terms. And Spalletti paints a more complicated picture of his former employee, because he did mention once upon a time to La Gazzetta dello Sport, one of like the sports enterprises in Italy, that there are 4 or 5 versions, of De Laurentiis, and he's not referring to his sons, right? There's one of the sons who are really grateful, and the other ones are just those ones who really act ratchet behind the scenes. So with that being said, you might even say to a fact that like the Napoli owner, has acknowledged his mistakes in what actually came next. And Rudy Garcia was appointed, was actually handed the reins, at the beginning of the season. But he was actually fired in November, with Napoli being 4th in the table. And De Laurentiis later said that he regretted not having taken this decision immediately, after hearing the Frenchman confess, in his introductory press conference to not watch any of the title-winning run. And it was a matter of, now obviously we knew there was going to be another coach to follow, because we saw Walter Mazzarri was the next man in charge on the touchline for Napoli. But De Laurentiis, hoped his familiarity with the club, which he steered twice to Champions League qualification in 4 seasons at the start of the 2010s, would make him the perfect, ferryman to actually find calmer waters and navigate through the rest of his season. But it wasn't meant to be, to say the least. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be, because instead of that, Mazzarri's Napoli scored 9 Serie A goals in 12 games. The fewest of any team in a league during his tenure. That just tells you that, whoa. That was a disaster, man. A disaster. You understand? And those circumstances, really hurt him a lot, because you look at Osimhen, the division's top goal scorer last season, was barely available during Mazzari's tenure, recovering from a hamstring injury in time for a small handful of appearances before departing for the African Cup of Nations. And despite returning exhausted, he has scored in both matches, under Calzona, so far. So, it's funny that, Osimhen has been on target, right? He scored the goals, and basically in both those matches, they've, have both resulted in a 1-1 draw, where Osimhen did find the back of the net for Napoli. And yet again, you have to also look back, is that the fact that some squad, the same squad, right? The same squad were able to cope with the absences of, Osimhen early on last season, when Simeone, as well as Giacomo Raspadori, they had to step up and fill the void. And neither the attack nor the midfield supporting it lost any key pieces over the summer, because we saw centre-back, Kim Min-jae, becoming the only starter to depart when Bayern Munich triggered, his 58 million euro release clause. And if this group, did not, need to recover better, and it says a lot that, you have to describe this fact that the sporting director's role, De Laurentiis, is not essential after, Cristiano Guantoli, a man widely credited for Kvaratskhelia bargain signing, left to join Juventus in the summer. And the squad, planning since has felt chaotic, with no adequate replacement found for Kim, and Napoli, scrambling this January to find cover for Osimhen, as well as Piotr Zielinski, who was omitted from Napoli's squad Champions League knockout, stages, despite starting regularly in Serie A, because he is expected to join Inter when his contract expires in the summer. So hopefully they will find a replacement for him, but at this particular rate in time, it's very difficult. How far can Napoli go? Because things are just not looking good for the defending champions. Because what could actually be mentioned is that none of the supporters feel better about seeing their team mid-table, right? And you look at the fact that the gap to fifth place, which could hold Napoli, Champions League spot stands, at 9 points, and Napoli still have 13 games to play. A lot can actually happen, in the zona Cesarini, right? As this weekend's opponents can actually attest, right? We're talking about Cagliari, right? And at this particular moment in time, things are not looking good for Napoli, because Napoli, they trail fourth place Bologna, right, by 11 points. They're 11 points off the Champions League spots, so it's not looking good for Napoli at all. Nothing is looking good for them. So, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. A lot of work needs to be done in Naples. Well. Yeah, man, as expected, right? Inter Milan, right? Travel to Lecce. So Lecce 0, Inter Milan 4, as expected, as I predicted. I've been getting my predictions right, of late. Funny how. And I really got my prediction right on this particular game, because I did say that Inter Milan were going to win by 3 or 4 goals, right? And that's exactly what happened. They won by 4 goals clear. So Inter Milan hit 4, right? The runaway leaders this season in the Italian Serie A. Simeone and Inzaghi's side, they put on a dazzling performance. They put on a dazzling display at Lecce, confirming their place at the top of the table. Because, now the win, over their win currently, in this year's, in the fact that they won away from home, over, the Salatini, was another impressive performance, from a long list, and one that actually saw incredible stats and numbers come out of it. And the first one, obvious, the man of the moment, Lautaro Martinez. So it has actually been an extraordinary season for Lautaro Martinez, because he now has scored his 101st goals in Serie A with Inter Milan in the match against Lecce. So the Nerazzurri captain, became the 9th player in the history, to reach the milestone of 100 goals with a single team in the league before turning 27. In the last 3 seasons, the Argentine striker has also scored the most goals in the competition, 64, right? At least 15 more than anyone else. Finally, with 22 goals in 23 matches, right? The Nerazzurri, number 10, has surpassed the record of goals scored in a single season in Serie A. Before that particular encounter against Lecce, right? What we actually saw is that, his maximum tally was like 21 goals, right, for the season, and incredible numbers that demonstrate to all the talent, the determination, the charisma of the player, who is leading Simone Inzaghi's team on the pitch, right? And again, he has actually pledged his loyalty to the San Siro club, because the Nerazzurri's positive league run continues, with the 4-goal haul, at the Stadio Via del Mare. 66 points have been collected in 25 Serie A games. Only in 2006, 2007 have they earned more than the same number of matches in the competition. On that particular occasion, they had 67 after 21 wins, as well as 4 draws. For the first time in their history in the Serie A, Inter have scored 20 consecutive away matches in the competition. They've scored in 20 consecutive away matches in Serie A. What an incredible record that is, to say the least. So incredible, because look, since January 2023, no team has won more away games than Inter in Europe's top 5 leagues, right? They've 16, like Manchester City. Furthermore, the defensive solidity, of Simone Inzaghi's team is reflected in the following figure, right? You have like 16 clean sheets in 25 league games this season. And, in the history of the Nerazzurri, right? It's only the second time in Serie A with 16 collected clean sheets, also in the 1988-1989 season, after the same number of matches. So we're seeing milestones and records just being broken, perhaps records also being cemented. That's what we're seeing from this team, Inter Milan. And another thing is that, we saw goals from Fratesi. What a great performance it was by David Fratesi. The Nerazzurri, midfielder, scored 1, and he also provided an assist. It is actually the second time, he has been able to achieve, a double in a single Serie A, league game, right? And we also saw the fact that, look, for Serie A, for the fact that Inter Milan, you cannot downplay, the factor of DeMarco. DeMarco has been incredible for Inter Milan this season, because it was another superlative game for Federico DeMarco, because once again, he showed the quality. He showed so much quality, because he's one of his side's effective attacking weapons, because in the last 3 Serie A, seasons, he is the second highest defender to have been involved in goals, right? He's been involved in 20 goals for Inter Milan this season, with scoring 9 goals and actually providing 11 assists, right? And we also saw a header from De Vrij. He's the Dutchman. He's so reliable, and he's got a strong finishing vein, because since he scored his first goal in the Serie A, he scored his first Serie A goal on the 11th of September 2016 against Chievo. And Stefan De Vrij is the highest goal scoring defender of headed goals in the competition in the Serie A, with 13 headed goals. So like I said, this guy is just on fire, man. He's on fire. And it tells you another thing, that Inter are running away, right? They're running away with this, they're running away with the title, and basically they will win. They will win without any doubt. They will win. And to say the least, Inter Milan, they really play centralizing football, man. They really are playing good football, because look, Inter Milan, basically what they are also aiming for now, they are also aiming to actually open up a 12-point lead in the Serie A table over Juventus, if they are able to beat Atalanta in their next game. And that's actually the potential that this Inter Milan side possesses. They can even win the Champions League, because I don't even understand why people are discrediting them, why people are not putting them in the race. Most people are saying it's either Manchester City or Real Madrid or Bayern Munich, but I say Inter Milan needs to also join the race, because wow, they've been scintillating this season. Because you look at the fact that in the last few weeks, Inter Milan have gained a sizable lead in the Serie A table, and this has, been due to the fact of, combination of few unexpected stumbles by title rivals Juventus and the Nerazzurri's own absolutely relentless form, because at the moment the gap stands at 9 points, right? And Inter Milan have an additional potential buffer of their game in hand. So Inter Milan, missed their Serie A, match at home to Atalanta in mid-January, and that was a result of the team being away in Saudi Arabia for the Supercoppa Italiana, at the time. Therefore, that match had to be postponed. So Inter Milan, as well as Atalanta, will finally meet, at the San Siro on the 28th of February, Wednesday. Then Inter Milan, will have played the same amount of matches as Juventus and all the rest of the teams in Serie A. So basically, Inter Milan, there's potential for them to actually open up the gap, to widen the gap by, beyond measures of Juventus, because now it's going to be a 12-point lead should they collect all 3 points at home against Atalanta. And the prospect of double-digit lead, at the top would certainly add to the sense that Inter are the big favorites to go on and win the Serie A title, which is it's a given, telling from their current form and the way they are playing football, right? Because Inter Milan, unfortunately, we must not also overlook the fact that they cannot take points for granted, because, Inter, they found out through the hard way, 2 seasons ago. Remember, they once had a game in hand against Bologna, which they did not play until April. And, that game in hand always gives Inter theoretical control over their own destiny in the title race with AC Milan. But Inter Milan lost that match away, at the Emilia Romagna, right? And that was untimely the decisive moment that allowed the Rossoneri to go on and win the title. So Inter Milan, they should really be wary and not take anything for granted, so that history does not repeat itself, because one way or another, after that particular encounter on Wednesday against Atalanta, Inter will know exactly where they stand, and so will Juventus, because, I think the title race is done and dusted. Inter Milan are taking it once again. And do you think Juventus will be able to catch up? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Inter Milan are the victors of the Serie A. Trust. Then later on at the San Siro, right? We saw the rivals of Inter Milan, AC Milan, take on, like I said, Atalanta at the San Siro, and that resulted in a 1-1 stalemate between AC Milan and Atalanta. Remember, AC Milan were looking to avenge that Coppa Italia defeat to the same opponents at the San Siro just about a month ago. So, with victory in the league, to actually solidify their spot in the Champions League, for Champions League qualification next season. So, basically coming into this, after a disappointing 3-2 defeat, away to Rennes, in the Europa League, AC Milan, faced Atalanta at the San Siro, basically hoping to solidify their spot, firmly inside the top four. Firmly inside the top four. And obviously, it was never going to be an easy task, because yes, it started in the best way possible, with Rafael Leao scoring a brilliant goal. What a wonderful goal that was, just 3 minutes into the game, ending a 5-month, league goal drought in the process. And AC Milan looked in control of the game, and they were just about, coasting, until the 42nd minute, when a penalty kick was awarded to, Atalanta, which was questionable to say the least. Yeah, and I actually agree, Atalanta did not deserve the penalty. But, however, it was actually converted calmly by Tian Koopmeiners, to bring the, scores level just before halftime. And this is the second time the Dutchman, finds the target against AC Milan at the San Siro. Remember, he did find the target in that 2-1 victory in the quarterfinals of the Coppa Italia. But AC Milan, certainly, they didn't allow the goal to throw them off balance, and they continued to dictate the game. However, it didn't really result in a second goal, as something that was missing, in the final third, despite the dominance. But we could see that, AC Milan were showing intentions of wanting to win the game because, as mentioned in the introduction, luckily Rafael Leao was able to get his first goal in the Serie A after just one goal, on the September the 23rd against Verona. And what a moment of brilliance it was, because he was able to pick up the ball, on the left touchline with a lot of work to do, in order to even get into a shooting position. But he was able to bundle through, Holem as well as Calvini, which is not even an easy task, right? And he was able to actually open up some space, onto his right foot and actually whipping a gorgeous shot, inside of the far post. What a brilliant goal that was from the Portuguese, right? And what a way to actually break your goal drought. I mean, that's a brilliant way to break your goal drought. And, Rafael Leao continued to show, he was the main threat for AC Milan in this particular encounter. And, his team throughout the 90 minutes, created chances, and Rafael Leao was the guy who was actually creating most of those chances for his teammates. He often drifted into central areas to actually try and expose Atalanta in transition. Unfortunately, the winning goal didn't come, and in the end, Leao's performance was something special. It was actually his best performance of the season, to say the least, and he was constantly trying, to get the ball and make things happen for his team, because currently now, Rafael Leao, has now scored 42 goals, and he has actually equaled the record of Rui Costa as the second top Portuguese scorer in Serie A history. So the AC Milan forward also reached 50 goals in top Serie A, in top, European leagues, and there's only way more to go. There's more to come from this brilliant Portuguese winger, because I can say that, look, if it wasn't for Leao's goal and a very strong overall performance, AC Milan would probably be, put forward the notion that, Yacine Adli's, deserved to be man of the match performance, because the Frenchman, had really, complete performance, in deeper lying midfield role, working very hard defensively with quite, the few crucial interventions, but was always, asking for the ball in the build-up too, right? And you saw with Aldi, he was not afraid to actually play the difficult balls between the lines, and most of the times, they were pretty accurate, opening quite a bit of space for his teammates, allowing them to actually make those runs, on the half turn. And what we also saw is that the game against Atalanta might just have been, one of his best, in red and black, and it's actually see him nice, to actually develop further, as he clearly has the talent to actually back it up. But I must say, to be honest, with that AC Milan performance, as much as I'm mentioning those two players, I was very disappointed with the performance of, the fact that, Leao as well as Aldi, they were protagonists, on the night, but I was very disappointed with the performance of Ruben Loftus-Cheek as well as Ismail Benacer, and also Christian Pulisic. They were the exact opposite of the performance that Leao as well as Aldi delivered for AC Milan, because you saw with Loftus-Cheek and Benacer, they barely helped Adli in the middle. And it's actually good. It's a good thing that the youngest of the three played such a brilliant game. Otherwise the situation could have been much worse, because Loftus-Cheek and Benacer were nowhere to be seen at all. There was very little of them. They showed very little, in that game for AC Milan. And Pulisic, he also struggled. He couldn't actually impact the game going forward, whilst, he was also committed a very sloppy mistake at the back that could have been very costly. And unfortunately, if it wasn't for the fact that Atalanta did not take full advantage of the situation, and the fact that, his teammate Adli's, challenge was the one that bailed him out of that, sticky situation, because, like I said, a player of Christian Pulisic's caliber, you would expect him to be doing much better, because going forward, the only positive moment, was when the American controlled the ball, with style after a long, a lovely long diagonal pass by Leao, but, he was unable to find the target, and if it wasn't like three disastrous performances by any means, but you have to acknowledge the fact that these three players could have stepped up, man. They could have stepped up in terms of seeing AC Milan over the line. They should have showed up, because had they showed up, perhaps we could have been talking a different story for AC Milan. They perhaps could have won the game, very convincingly had they showed up, right? And another thing, it feels as though, criticism of Giroud, might start with the obvious, precursor, that he has been picking up goals and assists throughout the season consistently, and he has worked overtime a lot too. Although we have to look at the fact that, he has also on multiple occasions not been able, to actually help the team out, with his overall play. And unfortunately, that was the case against Atalanta because, his hold-up play wasn't really there. He was unable to actually hold up the ball, And in the second half, when crosses were flying, he was nowhere near to be found. You understand? There were great crosses that were being played for him, but he was nowhere near those crosses. Like, he was nowhere near to be found. He was just in the wrong position at the wrong time. And again, the Frenchman, he offered very little going forward and was at fault for the penalty, which despite being a very questionable decision, I meant to say, but it doesn't really change the fact that he made a risky intervention, which, he perhaps should know better than to do, with all the experience that he has, right? And I hope he shall learn his lessons from that. But, we also saw, again, the coach of AC Milan, Stefan Pioli, he tried, to actually, change things a bit, as he introduced David Calabria, Yunus Musa, as well as we also saw Noah Okafor, coming on. But, to the contrary, to the trend of the season so far, they basically provided zero impact, those changes that he brought on. Remember Calabria, was just returning from a muscle injury, which meant, it was important for him to play a segment of such a challenging game. And, though he got himself into some good crossing positions, his end product was just very rusty. It was just not good enough. It was very poor. It was very erratic. It was just, and it was uncharacteristic of him because we saw Musa, came on full of energy. He tried to drive the play forward, yet he can sometimes, give an impression of not really being aware of the game situation, or what the right move is. I understand. And lastly, that the other change that came on, we saw Okafor, he got quite a difficult assignment, to come on and up, pick, an Atalanta side that, by Gasperini's own admission had essentially settled for a draw with 5 defenders and 2 holding midfielders. There was not much of an impact he could actually make, to say the least. And again, it's that story once again for AC Milan because now, they fall short now again, and chances of them winning the league title once again feels like, far-fetched because it seems like it's now becoming a formality, that Inter Milan will win the league this season. You understand? And thus, it will hit their 20th Scudetto before AC Milan. Because given the gap that has actually opened on the table, we saw the fact that AC Milan are now trailing Inter Milan by 13 points, right? And remember, they've done worse in the past, even under Stefano Pioli. Remember in the 2019-2020 season, after 26 rounds of action, they had fallen 21 points behind Antonio Conte's Inter Milan, and they were 3rd in the table, right? And that, however, was an AC Milan side in the process of being rebuilt. Pioli had taken over from Marco Giampolo, just after a few games, after completing the first phase of the work, and then COVID arrived, to actually hold the season, and afterwards there was a big upturn. To actually find a huge gap between the Rossoneri and the league leaders, Inter, you need to go back to 16 years, in the 2007-2008 season. The Nerazzurri, were 18 points above their CD rivals, right? And in the previous season, which ended which ended with the most recent Champions League win for Rossoneri in Athens, the gap was 22 points, with a game in hand for AC Milan. And in the era of 3 points for win, only in one occasion have the, Devils been so far from first place. Inter Milan was in like 2001-2002 season, by basically 915 points. So, yeah, man, there's a lot of history between these two teams, a lot of bad blood. But, yeah, to say the least, that wraps up AC Milan's season, But hopefully they will qualify for the Champions League. Yeah, man. Ish, yeah, hey, yeah. Football is a religion, man. It truly is a religion because you look at Serie A, right? Serie A, idiosyncrasies, right? From oddly phrased, anti-piracy hashtags to decaying stadiums, to a litany of officiating complaints. Italy's top flight is full of surprises, and um it's just so weird, that the fact that ahead of this particular matchup, right, between AS Roma as well as Torino at the Stadio Olimpico, we heard something that Torino, sent a not so covert agent to go and spy on Daniele De Rossi's recent training sessions, and it's just so funny, However, rather than using some, surreptitious, camera mic setup, Torino's secret agent, went, with the analog route, right? He actually was hiding in a tree with binoculars, and that was just funny, that was just hilarious. So hilarious to actually say the least. Whether it was actually due to the like subterfuge or simply the accumulated effects of Thursday's 120-minute slugfest against Feyenoord in the UEFA Europa League round playoffs. De Rossi actually made several key changes ahead of like that particular encounter against Torino on Monday evening. So while De Rossi, shuffled up, his starting lineup, giving the likes of Chris Smalling a run out, as well as Sado, Asmund the nod from the word goal. The most notable change was like the formation. We actually saw Daniele De Rossi going from, 4-3-3, and it was actually like it replaced Mourinho's, 3-5-2, featuring Chris Smalling, Ivan Indika, the AFCON winner, as well as Gianluca Mancini, at the back line. And after a mind mumbling opening 8 or 9 minutes, Roma finally managed to break through the Torino press. Basically it happened in the 10th minute of the game. We saw Sada Asmoon charging down the left channel, barreling towards the penalty area, and he did ever so well to actually cut back, square the ball to Rasmus Christensen, and the Danish wing, he just like he was unable, to actually convert the chance, because he was clanging the ball off the upright, right? And that was actually some great, positive play from the home side. And during, the following 10 to 15 minutes, we saw Roma, they had a hard time breaking through Torino's high press. We saw, although basically I can actually attest to the fact that it didn't really force them into turnovers, because they found it challenging to actually connect enough passes to truly escape the pressure, and it resulted in long balls over the middle or down the flanks towards Paulo Dybala, and Romelu Lukaku's absence only made matters worse, because without his presence at the top end of the field, there was no hold up play or a way to actually maintain possession while the white players advanced on the pitch, up on the pitch, and basically for the remainder of the first half, the song remained the same. Roma couldn't worm their way through the Torino press, and when they eventually did, they were frequently at a numerical disadvantage. It was only Dybala and Asmund trying to outwit 4 or 5 defenders on their own. So Roma may have been actually struggling in the run of play, but they caught a massive break in the 42nd minute when Asmund was fouled inside the area, resulting in a penalty kick that was coolly converted by Dybala to actually put the home side on top heading into the break. That was a great well-taken penalty from the Argentine World Cup winner. And unfortunately, for them, their elation, wouldn't last as long. Right, because we saw Torino, leveled matters, 2 minutes later, thanks to a well-struck header by Duvan Zapata, right, the former Atalanta striker, who split 2 defenders and managed to impart enough swerve, on the ball to actually target inside the opposite post and past, a diving Svila, right, the substitute goalkeeper for AS Roma, and you look at the second 45 minutes of that particular encounter between Roma and Torino. It was basically, we saw a change from how both sides actually approached the game from the first half. Roma, they sputtered out of the gates to begin the second half, facing, basically the same unrelenting Torino press, and they struggled to stitch together more than 2 or 3 passes. And there was little bit more life, in De Rossi's side when Asmun and Dybala, making some cutting runs through the midfield into the area. And thanks to a slightly reinvigorated approach, Torino was forced back off Roma in the final third, and it gave Dybala enough space to conjure this miracle, an absolute stunner. What a miracle from Paulo Dybala. What a wonderful strike that was, because with the defense on its heels, Dybala had enough time to actually find some space, and rip off a 25-yard bending effort, steering the ball past Vancha Milinkovic, right? And Savage outstretched hands, to actually restore, Roma's lead just shy of the hour mark. And it was a goal that only Dybala could score. Simply sensational. What a sensational strike it was from the Argentine. Brilliant goal it was. And rather than resting on his laurels, De Rossi made a triple change, in the very next breath, bringing on Romelu Lukaku, Eduardo Bove, Leonardo Spinazzola, into the place of Asmun Paredes as well as Angelino, giving the Giallorossi, some fresh legs for the final half of, an hour or so. And with the tenacious 1-goal lead in their pocket, Roma continued to press. They continued to press the issue, hunting for that decisive goal. Rather than sitting back like what Napoli did, Roma, they kept on hoping that, Torino would run out of gas. And once again, it was Dybala to the rescue, making it 3-1, just on the 70th minute mark. And look, it was Paulo Dybala's world. It was his day, his hat-trick. Basically, that's his first hat-trick for AS Roma, right? And it is his first hat-trick, since the 2nd of October in 2018. So he has had to wait for more than 5 years to actually get his hat-trick, since October the 2nd in 2018. And once again, facing a compact defense, Lukaku and Dybala took matters into their own hands, pulling off, succinct give and go, at the left edge of the box. And after taking the return pass from Lukaku, Dybala scored another sensational goal, slotting the ball, at the opposite post from a rather acute angle, completing his hat-trick in the process. What a performance it was from the Argentine. What a performance it was from him. I mean, that was a great performance, a performance of quality, a performance of it shows that he's got that, perspicacity, a performance of a match winner, a performance of a man who's meant for the big occasions, right? With actually time winding down in the match, we saw even De Rossi went, to the bench again in the 78th minute, swapping Smalling for Dean Hutchinson, giving the veteran defender some much needed rest, after his first start since September. And while, his final change saw Renato Sanchez come in for, Pellegrini. And just when it seemed like Roma would cruise, to an easy 3-1 victory, they conceded an own goal in the 80th minute. And it was, a right to left cross deflected off, Hutchinson boot and past Sevilla, right? Sevilla to pull the visitors within 1 goal, right? And in the end, it was academic as Roma managed to weather nearly 6 minutes of stoppage time to secure 3 critical points. This Roma second choice goalkeeper, his name is difficult to pronounce, but I will get it right. Sevilla, right? Sevilla. And yeah, man, I can say, De Rossi, did produce a masterclass, to say the least. It was actually a masterclass because, I've always found myself in Mourinho's, PTSD, right? And, De Rossi's sudden switch, at the back, to the 3-5-2, produced, the same, stilted, hesitant approach, ultimately cost Mourinho his job in the first place. And after 45 sluggish minutes, and conceding a potentially, back-breaking equalizer at the close, of the first half, Roma and Paulo Dybala were the ones who actually responded very well, pumping 2 crucial goals against Torino, in the second half. And All thanks to Paulo Dybala's heroics, Roma made it 5 wins, from 7 under the new manager Daniele De Rossi, who has to contend with another compact set of fixtures as the Giallorossi press on in the league and in Europe, because Roma now, they face AC Monza, on the road on Saturday, and that's not an easy hunting ground, because that is the team that, trashed AC Milan by 4-2 at that very same ground. So that's not an easy hunting ground for Roma. So they must not really underestimate that particular, game, right? It is going to be one of those games where they really need to exert themselves, to the best of their ability. They cannot afford to be complacent, because if they are to actually qualify for Europe next season, they need to actually ensure that, they continue, getting these much needed results, because, yeah, it's that time of the season where, you cannot be taking anything for granted. Yeah. So, like what Paulo Dybala now, Paulo Dybala now, he's basically now the 4th top goal scorer, the 4th top goal scoring Argentine in the Serie A history, right? In the history of the Serie A, he's the 4th, right, top goal scoring Argentine in the history of the Serie A, because his hat-trick against Torino, proved to be one of Dybala's career highlights. As we saw the ex-Juve man, he was responsible for helping Roma lead, over Ivan Juric's side after a tough back and forth. And, ultimately, Dybala's hat-trick was the difference maker in securing all 3 points for AS Roma at home at the Stadio Olimpico. And Dybala now has got like 121 goals in Serie A, right? So Dybala has scored 121 goals in Serie A for both Juventus as well as his current club AS Roma, so which effectively makes him the 4th top goal scoring Argentine in the league's history. And the top 3, remember, include Gonzalo Higuain with 125. He's not far off that. He'll be breaking Higuain's record, his former teammate and his former compatriot at the Argentina national team, Herman Crespo, with 153, as well as Gabriel Batista, right? So remember, Gabriel Batista, had 184 goals, league goals in the Serie A. So he's the top goal scoring Argentine in the history of the Serie A, Gabriel Batista. And I'm sure Lautaro Martinez will also be overtaking them. So Dybala and Martinez are currently those guys, the players that will be overtaking, the top 3, which is Gonzalo Higuain, Herman Crespo, as well as Gabriel Batista. And you look at the fact that when you analyze this particular game, between AS Roma as well as Torino, as you analyze it properly, you actually have to look at so many things, right? Dybala's hat-trick, was the one that lifted the Giallorossi past the Granata, who actually suffered, their 2nd defeat in a row after like their 6-match unbeaten streak to actually begin 2024, was snapped last week. And over the past 2 games, against Lazio as well as Roma, you look at Torino, they created 38 shots and they've conceded 14, yet they lost both. They conceded 14 shots at their goal, and they've had 38 shots. They've created 38 shots at goal in both matches, but they've lost both of them. And I think it's a matter of wasting chances, wasting opportunities that has actually cost them the game. Remember, they were just unlucky against Lazio too, because they score far too, they score far too few goals relative to the number of attacking solutions that they create, because it is actually funny that they were still unable to capitalize. The fact that they were able to dominate Roma in the opening stages of the game, it says a lot about them. The fact that, the fact that they were able to dominate, they created that high press. They were able to press Roma, the home side, putting them under immense pressure from the first whistle, but they could not make that pressure count. You understand? And you look at the fact that it has actually cost them big time, the fact that they were not able to turn that dominance into goals, to actually turn that dominance into a victory. Because remember, possession doesn't win you games, dominance doesn't win you games, but the goals do at the end of the day. And remember, now for Roma, it was just a matter of individual brilliance. You understand? It was just a matter of individual brilliance, a matter of change of formation, a matter of the fact that, look, remember, it's a home game for AS Roma. It was a must-win game. So there was going to be a time in the game where they were going to, slowly adapt to the pace of the game that, Torino was setting. So Torino have got themselves to blame for losing that match because of those wasted chances. But congratulations once again to AS Roma. Congratulations once again to Paulo Dybala. Yeah, man. Finally, last but not least, I'm gonna be concluding the Serie A, right? The matches that took place over the weekend, right? Serie A games, right? So it was the last game that we actually witnessed was the game between Fiorentina as well as Lazio. On Monday evening. It took place on Monday evening, just after the weekend. But this was actually the last of Matchday 26 of the Italian Serie A. So Fiorentina winning by 2-1 at home, against Lazio. So I guess, for Fiorentina, what can I actually tell you guys about that particular encounter? It was a tight affair, because you look at the fact that the woodwork, it actually proved to be, a greater obstacle, than, the visiting's defense, because the Viola eventually earned 3 points, in perhaps the best performance of the season. That was maybe their best performance of the season, because Fiorentina were on fire. They were on song, last night in that particular encounter against Lazio. And another thing that we can actually look at is the fact that, with the rain sheeting down on a chilly Tuscan evening, Vincenzo Italiano shook things up, trying, Giacomo Bonaventura next to Artur in a double pivot for the first time. And with Lucas Beltran, operating as the number 10, Maurizio Sarri didn't do anything unexpected. So it basically felt very much like a roll of the dice, from the Viola mister. And the atmosphere, it's worth mentioning, was also sort of bad, as the, Curva Ferrovia, was shut down as the Stadio Artemio, franchise renovations have actually begun, so that will actually be the new home of Fiorentina. So Fiorentina were, in the first half, you look at the first 45 minutes of that particular game, Fiorentina, what can I say, man? Fiorentina, actually had 3 corners, in the first 2 minutes of the game. That was crazy, man. Forcing some frightening moments for Lazio, which actually set the pattern, for the proceedings or onwards, right? And after a quarter of an hour or so, some lovely passing, put Nico Gonzalez through. But, unfortunately for Provedel, he made a fingertip save, palming it onto the upright, and then Bonaventura, with the net bagging, you understand, somehow saw his follow-up blocked, by Nicola Casella off the line, and it was shades of Jonathan Icones, against Monza, right? Monza, I meant to say. And, it was actually the Viola pressure, didn't actually let up. It didn't let up like that, because from that point onwards, it was actually, it was starting to, post away from paying dividends. And this time, it was Andrea Bellotti's header from, Cristiano Biraghi's corner that actually hit the upright, with Sotel, failing to strike the follow-up cleanly, allowing for Provedel, to actually push it away. Biraghi got in on the act moments later, firing a corner off, the post, as he nearly scored an Olimpico, right? And as any seasoned Fiorentina, supporter, could have predicted, though, it was actually Lazio who scored first. And guess who did it? Luis Alberto, ever so reliable. He got in behind and actually thumped home a Matteo Guendouzi pass. And it was actually the visitors' first shot on target and first real chance. It was actually like that. You better believe it. That was their first real shot on target in this particular encounter, and actually their first real shot at goal. You understand? First real shot and first real chance. And they made it count. Boy, oh boy, Luis Alberto didn't make it count, because it was a quality finish, and you got to give credit to Matteo Guendouzi. That was a beautiful assist, and Lazio were, able to actually capitalize on scoring their first chance on the game, and The second half, you look at the second half, Lazio went into the break, leading by a goal to nil. And you look at the second half, Fiorentina, they deserve a ton of credit for not giving up, because given the, celestially driven scoreline, they kept on turning the screws, creating numerous chances and half chances, and Nico actually came the closest with the strike from distance. Although Luca Ranieri, nearly got one off a corner, and the breakthrough finally came, from Belotti, whose low and slightly deflected cross, found Michael Coyote, all alone at the back post, and the teenager thumped it home for his first ever Serie A goal. What a way to actually get your goal, against Lazio, at home. And basically that's like an equalizer. And in actually keeping with the theme, his shot, of course, did hit the crossbar, on its way back into the net. And, 5 minutes later, we actually saw another dramatic goal. That was basically a dramatic comeback from the home side because, 5 minutes later, Belotti proved, decisive again. This time, he lashed onto a Bonaventura pass, into the box and spun Casele, whose flailing leg, caught Lil Gallo and brought him down for an obvious penalty. And Gonzalez stepped up, sent Providel the wrong way with a hesitation, and did exactly what we all expected. Doink the spot kicked up off the upright, and it was his second straight penalty miss and the third time for Fiorentina had hit the post in the game. Basically, it was a crazy game to actually witness because I would say, you can't actually blame his comedic, instincts, but it sure felt like, the heavens above, had decreed it, that Fiorentina would just not win the game. Fortunately, though, there was one man who doesn't care what the heavens think, and guess who's that? Fiorentina just had one of those games, and, Rolando, Mandragora, but at least, Jack Bonaventura did what he had to do, pouncing on a rebound from a Belgian strike from, the top of the box and turning it home. You knew he wasn't going to miss from, in front of an open net for the second time in the match. And again, what can I say, man? Lazio, they did attempt to fight back, but, the Aquel, never really looked threatening, at Pietro's, Terracino's goal again. And the only real drama was then when referee Marco Guede, who sure seemed to lean Lazio's way all evening, increased the added time from 4 to 5 minutes, prompting an outburst from Fiorentina assistant Ivano Tito, who took his red card and jogged off with platonic ideal of, a bemused shrug. And at full time, it was clear that Fiorentina had, they were the better team at the end of the day, and they deserved all the 3 points. It was a path that wasn't really the most straightforward, but I guess you say, they deserved all 3 points because they dominated the entire game. I mean, Fiorentina had 22 shots at goal compared to Lazio. Lazio only had 5 shots at goal. Fiorentina had 22 shots at goal. 7 of those shots were on target, right? Lazio only had 1 shot on target, which was the goal that they got. So, it tells you how dominant, the side was. I mean, they had 13 corners. Lazio only had 2 corners. You understand? So it tells you what a dominant display was for Fiorentina. And now that Fiorentina, you look at the table, what that means now, this victory. Fiorentina, they now leapfrog Lazio into 7th, position with 41 points, 5 off Atalanta, who are in 5th position. Perhaps just as importantly, it means that the Viola now hold the tiebreaker over the Aquil, total goals scored in a head-to-head matchups, which could make all the difference as the race for Europe, as she heats up. More than that, what we were just able to witness is Fiorentina's best overall performance for the season. I mean, it was, the side was better in every area of the pitch, albeit against any team that was coming off short rest, and played with toughness. That's, been notably absent for months. Maybe, just maybe, this win, only the second in 2024, can get this team's feet back under it and start some momentum, that these guys can carry into the Conference League, the Coppa Italia, as well as the rest of the league season, because they really do need to continue with this. And again, you look at once again how, Fiorentina now, they just need to continue with the momentum. continue with the momentum, just continue being more consistent, continue showing, putting like these kind of performances. Like this was a brilliant performance from the home side. What a wonderful performance it was, a dominant display, and hopefully they can keep it up. They can keep it up, man.